Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another Burlingame. It's a small-town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. This is Mark Lucchese, also known as Mark at the Mic, and my guest today is Peter Garrison, the longtime, now retired pastor of the Good Shepard Lutheran Church located at 301 Burlingame Avenue in Burlingame. After 28 years at the church, Pastor Pete hung up his robes in 2014. As an associate seminary professor, Pete instructed new seminarians in liturgy, rhetoric, and pastoral care in hospitals, homes, and during crises. Pete was also the Burlingame Police Department chaplain under Chiefs Gary Missel, Fred Palmer, and Jack Van Etten. He is the author of 5 books, including At Odds with God. His wife, Joanne, also authored the Burlingame Centennial, 1908 to 2008, a book on Burlingame's history. Pete and Joanne live in Burlingame, have one son, John, and 2 grandchildren. And now my conversation with Pete Garrison. Pete, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
I was hoping you were going to say something like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so typically I open up these podcasts with some fun facts. Kind of loosens us up a little bit. We get a couple of laughs, and we get into the meat of the business. But so before you became a minister or a pastor, you worked for the Cessna Aircraft Co,
Right.
barnstorming in Northern California and Nevada. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so before we get to the barnstorming, I have a question or two about that. How old were you when you got your pilot's license?
I learned how to fly up at Troutdale, Oregon Airport, and that's at the very opening of the Columbia Gorge in Oregon, outside of Portland. And can you imagine learning how to fly over the Columbia Gorge?
Had to be beautiful.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So were you like 20, 21, 18?
27.
27.
Yeah.
This was long after you went to UC Irvine, right? So this is long after graduation,
Right.
How did you get that job at Cessna? How did that come about?
It's who you know, because in aviation, it was very hard to get a job flying in those days. And I only had 75 hours. But one of my first jobs while I was going to college was working for a family friend, L.W. Hunt, who owned a Cessna dealership and wholesaler in Long Beach, California. And my job was, as a line boy, to go out and wash the airplanes and then polish them with turtle wax. Remember turtle wax?
I sure do.
That green wax?
Yeah.
And then I'd take toothbrushes and ease the turtle wax that had dried around the rivets of the airplane wings.
You really detailed it
Oh
out.
my gosh,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was summer. So L.W. Hunt knew me. And when you're bit with a flying bug, my dad was a fighter pilot in World War II. When you're bit with a flying bug, you just have to fly, but it's so expensive for a young man. So I knew I had to get some kind of job,
Right.
somehow flying, but impossible with 75 hours. But I wrote L.W. Hunt. He said, come on down to Oakland. We have a distributorship there, a wholesaler. Interview, see what happens, take a flight test. And I got the job.
Wow.
Oh, it was wonderful.
So did you go right into barnstorming?
Right into it.
All right, so just for our folks out there that are listening to this, what does barnstorming mean? What do you mean by that?
You know, that's an old, early days of aviation term. And what that means is, let's say you were a pilot during the war and you're flying biplanes and you got to make some money, after the war. So what you do is you'd fly your airplane, buzz a barn, get a crowd out from the city, land in the field, offer airplane rides, or maybe do some stunts for an air show. So that was barnstorming. And it was just getting a crowd together, charging some money for a show,
and then hopefully somebody would be interested in maybe purchasing the plane or what?
Right. My job was first to set up flight schools as a Cessna Pilot Center specialist. So I would go airport to airport and talk to people about setting up flying schools.
And this would be in Northern California and Nevada?
And then they'd buy airplanes from us.
Wow. How long did you stay with Cessna?
That was 4 years till the recession came on.
And the recession would have been?
Like 82.
82, yeah. Well, boy, we go back, don't we, a little
Yeah.
bit? Yeah, okay. So you were around 28 years old when you took that job with Cessna, right? Okay. All right. You also love to surf, so I know that you probably took that from Long Beach, California, up here to Northern California.
No, because in my day, surfers were also dopers. And I was trying to get in the military. So I was very clean and neat in high school and no funny stuff. And surfing was attractive to me, not the people that were surfing. So
Okay.
I didn't do that.
Okay, so wait a minute. You went to Wilson High School
Yeah,
in Long Beach, and then from there to Irvine, right?
yeah.
So you didn't learn how to surf till you were up here?
Right, midlife crisis. Yeah.
You just killed my whole image of you, Pete.
I know.
I had this guy, 6'2", 210 pounds, surfer dude, blonde hair, flying airplanes, and now I'm crashing and burning. No, seriously, that's great.
I decided I'd worn out too much of my lower body jogging, so I needed to wear out my upper body surfing. So that was my midlife crisis.
Which you still do regularly out in Pacifica, right? Yeah. Lindemar.
Yeah, Lindemar, boat docks down there on the south end.
All right. So, okay, you're flying your Cessna, you're doing barnstorming over Northern California and Nevada. When did the light come on, man? What made you move to the seminary? How did this all come about? Can you walk me through that journey a little bit?
Well, it didn't really come on. There's kind of like flickers all the time. So I'll go quickly. When I was 11 years old, I told my mom, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to be a minister." And she thought, well, we're a military family. I never heard of one of us thinking about going into the clergy, but okay. And I was involved with Vacation Bible School, Sunday school. I was in the choir at my childhood home in Long Beach, childhood church. But I was a kid also that would sit in the choir behind the organist, and I had juniper berries, and I'd pitch the juniper berries in the back of the organist's head. And I was that kid.
So you had a little bit of devil in you.
Oh, yeah, quite a bit. So that came and went. 20s come, and in the age of 20s, you tend to drift away from the church. Some people do. Some people become saints, but no. So I drifted away for a while. And another episode in my life that kind of got my attention, Joanne and I were exchange students in Honduras when we were teenagers. There was a war going on. That was exciting and romantic and scary. But we were out on a picnic, and a guy tried to cut my head off.
Whoa.
And he missed. He fractured my skull. And I got some defensive wounds in my left hand. And Joanne and I started running, and I fell over a stone wall, ended up in the weeds. Joanne, hid me like baby Moses in the reeds of the Nile, and then she hugged me and got me all over and ran down the hill to get help. I had a vision of sticks, like stick figures, one stick figure helping another stick figure up. That's the amount of my vision. And I thought I had to get up out of the weeds. So I got out of the weeds, started down the hill, remembered Joanne, went back up the hill a little bit, which would be, a good place to die, going back up the hill, not down the hill. But anyway, I was looking for her. I couldn't find her. I'd asked her, are you gonna make it? And that's when I fell over into the weeds, which would have been good last words, rather.
Yeah.
Right? Thinking about somebody else. Anyway, so I started down the hill. Now, where the light comes on is I'm basically quoting Psalm 30, although I didn't know it, on the way down the hill. And Psalm 30, except, and I'm going to paraphrase it in my own words, it's raining, there's mud, there's blood, and I point up into the clouds and I go, this is not the deal. You're supposed to help me. Not a very elegant prayer,
no,
but heartfelt at this point.
You're right.
So anyway, the rain stops, and some people come up to help me, and Joanne is waiting down.
And you're bleeding profusely from the head.
Yeah, I was really getting close. I couldn't have made it another 10 minutes or so once I got to the hospital. So anyway, got to the hospital, and anyway, so that's the story of a light coming on, where I go from an immortal 17-year-old to a wounded animal.
Yeah. So you said 17-year-old, so you were a student at Wilson.
Yeah.
Was Joanne a student at Wilson?
She was a student in Minnesota.
How did you guys meet then?
We met at the baggage claim area in Miami Beach Airport, and I saw her and went over and said, "Hi, I'm Pete Garrison." I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew I had to meet her. So that's where we met, because she happened to be at the airport at the same time as I did to meet with the other exchange students to go to our assigned countries.
And where was she? So did you guys end up in the same country?
Same
Obviously
town.
You did, right.
Same town.
So that was very coincidental or meant to be?
Yeah. It was meant to be, for sure.
Meant to be. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were going to church or Sunday school, Bible school as a youngster.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a Lutheran? It was at a Lutheran church
Right.
that you were going to. So you were raised as a Lutheran?
Well, I was. My mom would take me to her Presbyterian church. Dad would stay home to guard the house because he knew that people break into Christians' houses on Sunday because they're in church, right?
He's smart.
Smart guy, right?
Yes.
So he'd stay home, but Mom would take me. And I think my first memory of church is her voice reciting the Nicene Creed. You know, God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Now, I don't think really a kid would remember that, but that's what I remember remembering.
Yeah.
And how touching that, you know, this mom is confessing this creed, which this month is 1,700 years old.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's a good trivia question.
Little
and
nugget,
answer
right?
going for me.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. So take me back to, you know, your flying Cessnas, this and that. When do you make the decision to join the seminary?
Well, it's, you know, both the decision to join seminary and to be a Catholic happened with big changes in the world. So what happened with the decision to go to seminary is the recession and the air traffic controller strike and Arab oil embargo, and Cessna went out of business. We went on a honeymoon. I came home. I put the key in the hangar door and it wouldn't work. I was locked out. We were out of business.
So you and Joanne were married at this time then? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so,
So you were locked out. That was it.
yeah,
Cessna's done.
done. So
All right.
I went to fueling airplanes and going to Cessna.
Right.
I mean, to go into seminary, yeah.
So were you having these talks then with Joanne about maybe becoming a pastor? And, I mean, how did she feel about, I'm going to be married to a pastor, okay?
Well, I think
it's different, man. Come on.
Oh,
You got
yeah.
to admit that's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, because when we got married, I was going to fly airplanes and she was going to have babies, and
Right.
this is what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, I think she bit her tongue because she goes, you know, you might, what about like seminary or being a minister? And I go, well, that's a good idea. And oh, no. But, you know, I'd been going to church up in Hayward, wonderful pastor, William Bragstad, and was very touched by his way of being a pastor and a shepherd. And so it must have been percolating. So, you know, when she came out, she was going to work at home and have babies, but she'd been an attorney for the state attorney general's office in Minneapolis. When she came out, of course, there isn't a transfer of understanding between attorneys in Minnesota and California. So when she found out that I'm going to be cleaning houses and doing gardening to make money for the next 4.5 years, then she decided she needed to go back to get her bar exam
For
in
California,
Yeah,
right.
which she did perfectly. Got that done the first time through. She passed the bar.
That's no surprise for anybody that knows Joanne. So
Yeah,
that's
she's
no
really
surprise.
smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then she worked, and then she became a counsel for the Gap, and then a vice president for the Gap. And that was during the glory years of the Gap when Sharon Stone was wearing the black
When
T-shirt.
everybody was wearing Gap
Yeah,
clothes,
the
yeah,
black
and then
T-shirt at the
baby Gap
Oscars.
clothing came
Yeah,
along. Yeah,
yeah.
got it right. But so at this time, you were at seminary, or had you left the seminary now, graduated, and moved over to Good Shepard here in Burlingame? Or
No, she was an attorney for the Gap while I was still going to seminary, because Lutheran Seminary is about 4.5 years.
yeah. So is it fair to say that she was the breadwinner at
Oh,
this point in
absolutely.
time? Okay.
Yeah, no, and continue to be,
Yeah.
because you don't go into the ministry for the uniform and the money.
Right. Not at all. Okay, so 4.5 to 5 years through Lutheran seminary.
Seminary,
Sorry. Okay. So now you graduate, right? So what do? Go to Pastor LinkedIn and get a job here in Burlingame? You kind of struck gold coming to Burlingame, huh?
Well, that's true, because some of my people that I know had to wait years and years and years to get a call. And in my days, it was very hard to get a call here in the Bay Area because it was very popular to come here. And a lot of the pastors in Minnesota and North Dakota, they're thinking California looks pretty good.
Yeah.
So what happens is when you graduate with a Master's of Divinity, there's no guarantee that there's any sort of job, because for Lutherans, the call comes from below, which means the people call you. So there has to be a need, there has to be a congregation that thinks that you're the right shepherd for them, and it's only then that the bishop will say, okay, well, now you're ordained and you're going to be sent over here to this church. What happened in my case was that I happened to have a fellow seminarian who was on the church council at Good Shepard, Mike Harvey. And he had mentioned my name. So because of that, then I started interviewing at Good Shepard.
Mike Harvey.
Mike Harvey, not the car guy.
Okay, thank you. I was going to... Okay. All right. Did you even know about Burlingame? I mean, had you even heard of the city
Joanne
of
and I
Burlingame?
had driven through. We drove up Easton Drive, and we
Yeah.
thought, what a lovely town.
Right.
What a lovely place.
Right. So then you get selected to be the pastor at Good Shepard, and that goes on for 28 years.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
All right.
Because somewhere in there, well, let's see. You retired in 2014? Right. And somewhere along the line there, well, you retired, you're doing your portrait painting, you're surfing, you're loving life, right? Yeah, everything is good.
Everything's good.
But somewhere along the line, you had a little shift in faith. What year was that? You decided to leave Lutheranism and you converted to Catholicism, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good so far?
Yeah.
Okay. What year was that? I mean, how did all that come about? That's a big move, man.
That's
a big move. Lutheran pastor, great, 28 years, thank you very much. Going to convert to Catholicism. How does that happen?
Slowly, right? People aren't surprised. They go, well, like Joanne goes, well, you've always been Catholic, you know.
Why would she say that, though?
Well, if you were to, we'll get into this later on with some of your questions that you gave to me, but if you were to come to my church, Good Shepard Lutheran Church, and you were a Catholic, you would feel absolutely at home because everything would happen the same way you're used to at Mass. And, you know, Martin Luther, back in the 1500s, would approve of that same Mass.
Okay.
There wouldn't be attention given to Mary, but everything else would seem very similar.
You would have communion.
Communion, believing in the real presence, that the body and blood of Christ, body and soul, soul and divinity, is in the bread and the wine. You'd hear confession and forgiveness. You'd hear the same chants, the same words in the liturgy.
Interesting, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So how did this whole thing evolve, though? You can't. What made you move to?
Well, I'd been reading a lot of the writings of Saint John Paul II now, Saint John the Great. Saint John Paul the Great.
Okay.
And then also Benedict XVI, reading a lot of his work. And then I was always interested in St. Augustine and was reading more about St. Thomas Aquinas.
Were you doing any of this while you were a pastor, though?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did a lot of studying.
Was any of this conversion to Catholicism going on in your head at that time, or are you just strictly, I'm a Lutheran pastor and that's the way it's going to be?
I think my magnetic heading was always drawn towards the seriousness of the Catholic writings and encyclicals and the scholarship that went into it. So that would just be a natural heading for me to take.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So 2014, you retire. When did all this kind of shake out? I mean, what year did you convert?
It was the year of COVID.
2020.
Yeah. So remember I told you that I went to seminary because of the recession?
Yes.
Now we have this giant thing happen with COVID.
Right.
And in COVID, the churches shut down. And I thought, why are we running? Why is the church shutting down? And now we have His Excellency, the Archbishop, Salvatore Corleone. He's out pushing Mass to be opened. California shut everything down for a while and opened it back up. London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco at the time, said, nope, we're keeping the churches shut. And the Archbishop said, well, you can go to the hardware store, you can go to a liquor store. How can we not have Mass? Mass is essential. Open our churches. And he wrote letters and weren't answered, and he made public statements and I think even marches. And I thought, this guy's like Batman fighting the politics of Gotham City or something. He's like a United States Marine, the few, the proud, and the brave. I want to be on this team, And so I really admire his to this day, this emphasis on the real presence, because St. Ignatius said, we had this virus, which was very serious, but St. Ignatius, one of the apostolic fathers, he said, what we have to offer in the Catholic Church is the antidote to death and the medicine of immortality. So if you have that, even in the midst of a plague, it's pretty important to keep offering that to the people who are in the plague. So I thought that the Archbishop's take on what was going on was very inspiring. And so then I started going to St. Bartholomew's up on Crystal Springs and joined the men's group there. And the men's prayer group is wonderful. Men about 10 years older than I am that have experienced so much in life, and I sit there and learn from them. So,
why did you happen to select St. Bartholomew's in San Mateo? Why wouldn't you just go to Our Lady of Angels or St. Catherine's in Burlingame?
It's a good question. And Joanne and I talked about that. And it's because I thought I might be fast-tracked. They'd go, oh, here's Pastor Pete, and, don't you want to do this? Don't you want to do that? Don't you want to do this? Don't you want to do that? And I just wanted to sit in a pew for a while because I just retired, pretty much. I just wanted to sit in the pew for a while and pray, pay, and obey. I didn't want to do anything. So I wanted to just...
What'd you say there? Pray?
Pray, pay, and obey.
I love it.
Just sit there, And so I just wanted to start slowly.
Did you know any of the priests up at St. Bart's?
No.
Okay. So during this transition time when you were, I don't want to say wrestling, but making the decision to leave Lutheranism and move over to becoming a Catholic, did you seek out a Catholic priest? Did you have anybody to confide in, anybody to sort of mentor you with this, to spill your guts to, I guess? Was there anybody like that?
No, not directly.
Okay.
I just sitting, pray, pay, and obey. And I asked one father, Father Senek, I asked him, I said, now how do I, be okay with coming up and having communion at the church? And he says, well, have you been to the classes yet? And I go, no. And he goes, well, you got to go to the classes. So, okay. So I went to the classes for a year.
That's the conversion situation, right, where you're converting?
Yeah.
Is that how long they last? Is 1 year?
Usually.
And how often are the classes? Once a week?
Once a week.
Yeah. Okay. So you went through that process at St. Bart's?
Yeah.
And I guess there must have been other people there.
Yeah, a few others, yeah.
Converting, right?
Right.
Wow. Okay. I just think that's totally heavy, man. Okay. So, Pete, the transition time was you retired in 2014. You began to convert in 2020, the pandemic year. When you retired as the pastor of the Lutheran Church, Good Shepard in Burlingame, did you and Joanne continue to go to that Lutheran church, or did you start going to a different church? I mean, was it okay to be seen, even though, I don't know how all that works. Tell me a little bit about that.
In our flavor of Lutheranism, and there are many, when you retire, you have to leave. You have to go. And it sounds brutal to some people, but it makes sense because you let the new broom sweep clean.
Right.
And you don't have another pastor saying, well, I did it this way.
Over his shoulder.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So we have a altar and pulpit fellowship with the Episcopal Church of the United States. And so we started going to St. Paul's Episcopal Church.
That would have been on Easton? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, no, across the street from Molly Stone's. Yeah. I'm sorry, I blanked.
From your old spot.
Yes.
Right. And so we were there, and we very much enjoyed their music program with Dr. Susan Jane Matthews and her mastery at that beautiful organ. And of course, it's just a jewel box of a church, and the people are so kind, and so we felt very much at home there. And then, because I was a Lutheran pastor, I was asked every once in a while to preside at the Eucharist and to preach, and that was a great privilege. And so we felt at home there. And
are the services similar?
Very similar. Again, a very Catholic Mass. The language is different. The more inclusive language with the Episcopalians than would be in a Catholic church.
So the Lutheran ministry, the Lutheran religion, doesn't have the layers then, the parish priest, the Monsignor, the bishop, the archbishop, the cardinal, etc., right? There's no layers like that?
They'll have like the head of the church and maybe what they call a bishop, and then they'll have the pastor.
Okay.
Yeah, and church council, things like that, synod council, things like this.
But they have a head of the church, but it's not like
There's no
grandiose like the Pope, in other words.
There's no authority.
Right.
There's no authority.
Okay.
Yeah. It's hard to exercise it.
Pete, if you don't mind, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then I got another story to tell you.
I love the stories.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
All right.
While we take a break, I'd like to thank everyone for your support over the last few years. These interviews would not be the success and fun they are without your comments, recommendations, and subscriptions. And special thanks to the Burlingame Historical Society for their encouragement and support. And now back to the show. Okay, Peter, we're back, and I think we're back because the red light is on. That means we're recording.
Good.
That's always a good sign.
Good.
So, all right, this question here: how did you come to terms with key differences between the two traditions, like views on the Eucharist, the role of the Pope, and Catholics' devotion to Mary? How does that size up against what you were doing as a pastor for a Lutheran church?
Well, even in seminary, I was talking about the Pope, and one of my seminary professors said, well, why do you think the Pope's so important? I go, well, somebody's got to be in charge. And I come from a military family. I respect rank, right? So Pope's in charge? Sounds good to me, right? So that was a little radical, perhaps, for some of my Lutheran seminary professors.
Yeah.
As far as the Eucharist goes, there isn't really a difference in understanding. There's a different way of describing, but Catholics, and especially with our Archbishop, see the Eucharist as the fons et culmen, the reason, the start and the finish.
Are you throwing Latin out at me right now? Okay,
Sorry,
yeah, all right, yeah.
and I'm failing to translate it correctly.
That's okay.
Source and summit. There it is. Source and
Okay.
summit. The Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. It gives us faith. It strengthens our faith, and eventually, this is what we want in heaven: is to see Jesus as the bread of life. So, for instance, when the priest in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, says Jesus' words, "This is my body. This is the chalice of my blood," the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, the creative aspect of God from the beginning, when he speaks words, he speaks things. So let there be light, there's light. Let there be creeping things on the earth, there's creeping things on the earth. So this is my body, especially is, right? Hoc est enim corpus meum. This is my body. The bread is now his body. This is the chalice in my blood. This chalice now holds Jesus' blood. So there's no mystery to it. It all holds together. It's all systematic. And within our understanding of our faith. So there is no problem, I think, with Lutherans and with Catholics especially, understanding that when God promises to be a baby, he's a baby. God promises to be killed on the cross for our sins like a thief. He dies a real death. He knows what it's like to be human. He plays by his own rules. And when he says, this piece of bread is me, what a wonderful gift. What a wonderful gift. And this cup of wine is me, what a wonderful gift. What a wonderful gift. So we give thanks. That's what Eucharist means. We give thanks. We celebrate the Eucharist. We give thanks to God. So no problem there. Now, with Mary, that's another situation. You have to be careful. We venerate, as Catholics, Mary, but we adore Jesus. So there's a difference there. Now, as far as, I love the word fittingness in Catholic understandings of things. It is fitting that, for instance, Mary be ever virgin. It is fitting that Mary would be assumed bodily into heaven because she was full of grace and didn't have sin. And so she couldn't just die a normal death, so she would be assumed into heaven. And that gives us great faith that we as humans, not part God, not true man and true God as Jesus is, but human like Mary, we can have a resurrection too. We can be brought up into heaven too at the resurrected day. So,
are you speaking there as a Catholic?
as a Catholic,
Right. Okay.
And then the other thing is, when you look at Mary and the intercessions of saints, Mary's a perfect example for why I think it's important to ask for prayers of people. Like I ask, Mark, pray for me. I'm not feeling good today. I'll ask my mom in heaven, Sarah Garrison. Mom, I remember you and I love you and I hope everything's going good for you. Would you pray for me? I think it's natural. So with Mary as an intercessor, not as a pretend Jesus or anything, but Mary as the mother of God and as the mother of Jesus, her intercessory nature is given in the first miracle that we just celebrated, I think last week. And that's a miracle at Cana in Galilee. That's where Jesus changes water into wine. It's the first miracle he does.
He saves the best wine for the end, right? When they ran out?
Yep. And what happens is, in this gospel, Mary notices that there's a problem. Mary calls Jesus' attention to the problem. Mary backs away from intruding on any power of Jesus because he goes, my hour has not yet come. So she backs away, but then she tells everybody else, do whatever he says. So she sees what's wrong. She intercedes for the problem. She withdraws in humility, but she also directs all the power to Jesus. And that's a perfect example of why I think it's a fine idea to ask for Mary's help when we're saying our prayers.
You would not do that as a Lutheran?
No.
Okay. During your conversion time, when you're deciding to leave the Lutheran Church and convert, how did your family and your former churchgoers all react to that? How did the word get out, I guess?
Well, I'll tell you about my conversion to be a minister. Now, my dad was a rear admiral in the Navy, and I was going to tell him that I was going to go into the ministry. And Joanne and I were at home in Long Beach, and I was in a cold sweat because I just knew it was going to be tough to tell my dad. And I told my dad, and my dad looks at me like I've just told him I'm going to run away and join the circus. He goes, no, son, no. And my brother, he's an evangelical atheist. He just, thinks everybody should be an atheist. He's just going, are you crazy? What's wrong with you? And so that was very difficult. But again, because people kind of always knew I had this Catholicity within me, I don't think it was that big of a surprise. And in the Bay Area, it isn't, people are pretty easygoing. I think it used to be a scandal, I think, back in previous generations,
Right.
if a Lutheran would
I
become
think that's
a
the
Catholic.
word I was looking
Yeah.
for. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a scandal. But these days, I don't think so. And then them knowing, it's like people that knew me when I decided to go to seminary. They go, oh, that makes perfect sense that you'd be headed that way.
Yeah. Okay, so you convert. Now you're a Catholic, but Joanne is still a Lutheran. She didn't convert at the same time.
Poor Joanne. She started as a Swedish Baptist. Her family founded a church in
Minnesota?
In Minnesota.
Wow.
Then Lutheran, right? Okay, now she's in the Episcopalian Church. And oh my gosh, now we're swimming the Tiber to Rome.
Well, yeah, because what did you do on Sundays? Did she go to St. Paul's and you went to St. Bart's, or did you guys go collectively together to St. Bart's, or
I'd go to
what happened on Sunday?
I'd go to the early Mass at St. Bart's, and then I'd come back to the Mass at St. Paul's.
Did she go to any of those Masses with you at St. Bart's?
Maybe once or twice.
Okay, so what was her conversion then? Through osmosis with you? She said, this is the way it's got to be, or what? I mean...
Just through my gained saintliness and
Yeah.
holiness, the glowing aura of saintliness that you must feel right now.
I do.
Just sitting next to me.
I feel like I'm glowing right now.
No, I think she says, I want to take the same communion that my husband's taking.
Yeah. So there was no hesitations about your decision then, worried about the broader Burlingame community or anything like that. You just said, I'm going to do this, and we're moving on.
Yeah, it was necessary.
And you took your classes at St. Bart's, and they took about a year, right? go to Mass at St. Bart's, you and Joanne now, every week?
Yeah, I go to Mass and I help teach the classes now.
Yeah. What if, I don't know how to phrase this, let's see. So, and I know it's not going to happen, but it could happen. What if you got the call again, but you couldn't become a priest with the Roman Catholic Church because you're married? Does that bother you at all? I mean, doesn't some of the ways that we think, me being a Catholic, no women priests can't get married. As a Lutheran, your church could do that, right? You could be married.
Oh,
you were a married pastor. And I walked by the Lutheran Church on Burlingame Avenue a couple of days ago, and it said pastor, it was a lady, right? But can't do that as a Roman Catholic. Doesn't that bother you?
Well, marriage isn't the problem. I could be a married priest converting from Lutheranism to Catholicism, being married, but once my wife would die, then I couldn't remarry. So,
okay.
So marriage isn't the problem.
Oh, it's not. That's interesting.
Yeah, age is the problem, maybe. Right?
Okay, so wait a minute. Let's get clarity here. So
Okay.
you're telling me that you could be, if you got the calling and you wanted to be a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, you can do that because you're converting. Is that correct? Because
Right.
you're already married.
Right.
Has that been that way for a long time, or what?
I think, wasn't there a Lutheran priest, married priest at St. Catherine's for a
Gosh,
while?
I don't remember. I just don't. That is very interesting. Okay, good. Do you have any ambition to be a Eucharistic minister or a deacon or anything like that? I mean, you said you're teaching right now.
Right. Well, I just think it's probably an age thing because priest formation takes 6 to 8 years. I could get time off maybe for good behavior and a reduced sentence. but I'm 73 years old now, so
And looking darn good, man.
I got a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of energy, but
No ambition to be a deacon, no, or anything like that?
no, I really found a lot of fulfillment and meaning in hospital calls and in going to rest homes and offering the sacrament. So I could volunteer perhaps to be a Eucharistic minister outside of the church. I don't want to be a Eucharistic minister in the church during
Right.
Mass.
So you would deliver communion to somebody's home.
Yeah,
That's
so
a great thing.
I could see do that.
Yeah.
I'm a lector now during Mass, and
How often?
a couple times a quarter, 3
Yeah.
or 4 times a quarter.
Great. How long ago did Joanne convert?
A year after I did.
Okay. So let's go back to Good Shepard for a minute.
Good old Good Shepard.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
We're going to reflect here for a moment. So what are some of your fondest memories of being the pastor at Good Shepard?
Well, I liked that it was at the point where I was baptizing babies that I'd baptized. So you see, as the Bible says, the generations rise up and pass away. And another, I really liked, we used to get together with the youth of the Episcopalian Church, and 300 kids, and I would lead our kids, would spend the night at Grace Cathedral.
Oh, boy.
And so these 300 kids are together, and we say prayers, and there's games and stuff like that, and snacks and stuff. But then we all sleep on the cathedral floor. And that's cold stone, but
I bet.
It warms up. Plus, I knew I had to sleep next to the baptismal font, not out of any piety, but because I knew the vents, the heating vents,
Was
from
close
the
by.
furnace was there. See, so I'd have my kids sleep over by the baptismal font. But then in the morning, you'd wake up with the sun coming through the stained glass windows and the organist would be playing gentle music, and we'd have oranges or something for breakfast. Then I'd take them on a walking tour down to Chinatown. So we'd go to Sam Wu's with the world's rudest waiter, Edsel Ford. He's still working there, and he'd be very rude. You'd order a Coke, he'd go, "No Coke, you get 7-Up." And okay, Edsel. But anyway, so we'd have breakfast or lunch there. Then I'd take them to the Buddhist temples up above the busy streets, and we'd see the fortune tellers there and ancestor worship there. And I'd take them out on the balconies. I said, "Now, we have a lot of other faiths going on here, but look at all the crosses out over the city of San Francisco, Little Italy, and look at all the crosses and stuff." And I go, there's the sign and surety of your salvation and your faith, and and that cross sets you free for eternal life and through the forgiveness of your sins. So there's going to be a lot of action in your life and stuff, but just keep following that cross. So that was an important and fun time. So I did that.
What
for
were
a
the
number
ages of the children?
Preteens and teens.
Yeah. Okay. I have a quote that I found. The church has definitely changed over the years. Metal worker attendees have been replaced by PhDs and high-tech employees. It is unusual to be a pastor at only one church in one's lifetime, as it was in my case. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean metal worker attendees have been replaced? Metal worker attendees are no longer going to church? Tell me about this a little bit. That's your quote, by the way.
Yeah, and no wonder it was just scintillating. But the church used to be filled with Pan Am workers, United Airlines workers, American customer service personnel, a lot of airline people. Then, .com comes and changes. And what I found wonderful in the church was that this woman, a German immigrant from the Dust Bowl days who ended up in Tulare on her hands and knees as a little girl, dragging bales of cotton or bags behind her as she picked cotton and would put it in the bag behind her. She was a member of our church. So she picked cotton in Tulare as a German immigrant from the Dust Bowl days.
Boy.
Then we have a woman, she's been involved in a school board here and is a teacher. She's a Stanford astrophysicist.
My gosh.
Who studies like Aurora Borealis and it's whatever difference it makes and whatever it is that she's talking about. But so you have, honest to gosh, an astrophysicist listening to, oh my gosh, whatever I'm going to say. Mm-hmm. And you have a person who picked cotton. And how can I say anything? And I would just aim high, and again, kind of take refuge in the apostolic fathers and in St. Augustine and people who know things more than me, to use them as foils in my preaching, and then to visit with these people, to hear their stories, to help them with their ups and downs, and the baptism of their children or their grandchildren. It was such a great privilege. I was a general practitioner. I was the resident theologian. That's the very old style Lutheran pastor. And I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah. So if I was to go to church here on Sunday, and I call it Mass, I don't know what the Lutheran service, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Service. Did you do more than one service on Sunday? Did you have a co-pastor that would do like the 8 o'clock service or the 9 o'clock? You follow my drift
Right.
here?
We had, I didn't have a co-pastor, I didn't have any staff, but I would have students given to me, and I made a mistake. I wasn't an associate professor. That would be pretty special. Uh-huh. I was an adjunct professor.
Which means what?
I was like a drill instructor.
Okay.
The seminary would send me students for a couple years, and I would teach them how to be correct preaching and teaching both form and content on Sunday morning, and take them perhaps to some house calls and some emergencies and things like that.
But were you the one, so you were doing the services on your own then for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would have lay assistants. I would have, altar assistants
Right.
and people like acolytes lighting the candles. And so we'd have that. But we'd start out with a Sunday school, which would be a worship service, but I always wanted the children in worship. So it wasn't a matter of parents dropping off children and going to have breakfast and coming back and picking them up. The parents that joined our church would understand from the tribal aspect of how we were acting that they were to stay there and to worship with the kids in Sunday school, and then take the kids from Sunday school into what you would call Mass. So Sunday school was short and sweet.
Was Sunday school separate then from
Yeah,
the church?
it was in one room.
Okay.
Then there'd be food.
Right.
Right? And then there'd be, eating kind of quickly,
Yes,
right?
of
Donuts
course.
and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then we would go into to Mass. But there'd also be breakfast. I'd have breakfast for them every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Cereal and waffles and stuff like that.
How long was Mass?
Oh, 45 minutes.
Okay.
My sermons are 8 minutes. At the
Similar to
longest.
Catholic, right?
Yeah.
But your sermons were quick but to the point.
8 minutes, yeah, at the longest, right?
Yeah. Did you have to give out more than one sermon a day then? I mean, did you have a couple of services that you had going on?
Just
Sunday?
one.
Just the one.
But then I do, of course, Lenten services, Advent services, special services. So I was preaching probably 60 times a year.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. There's a lot still to go here, but I'm running out of time. But a couple of things we're going to touch on, right?
Okay.
You were also a chaplain, I mentioned in the intro, for the Burlingame Police Department, right? And you wrote quite a few books. As a matter of fact, I bought one.
Oh.
And I forgot to bring it with me to have you autograph it, but there's another time I'll see you at Odds with God, which is a wonderful primer, I think, on reading the Bible, right? Because I skimmed through it quickly. Yeah. I'm having a problem reading the Bible, but we'll talk about that off mic, okay?
All right, my son.
Because this is your show, not mine.
All right, my son.
Okay? So the becoming a chaplain and writing all the books, how did all that come about?
Books were just a natural outgrowth of me thinking all the time. And, you know, that at odds with God is because I wanted to write quirky stories that would get people's attention, kind of like the early Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
You know, short and sweet and kind of weird. And so I have Adam and Eve and Judas, and they're dealing with their doubts and their struggles with God. And then I have quotations from saints to kind of give some calming support to the doubts or the worries that people have, and then scripture, and then a little worship service that people can go through, some questions that induct them into the story, so they can kind of wrestle with what the character's doing, not put too much focus on themselves, maybe if they're in a group, but it can help them work through doubts or any kind of struggles they're having with God about things. Yeah, so that just was a natural outflow of my thinking about sermons.
Right, and you would do this like during the evenings, days off?
During the day.
Yeah.
You know, just in the office, typing away.
Right. And the chaplain, how did that?
Oh, that was so fun. Well, I was with the Critical Incident Stress Management, I think, at the time. So he helped law enforcement with when they have a bad day. You take care of the officers. And right now I'm a board member of the 100 Club of San Mateo County, which takes care of widows and orphans of law enforcement. And so this one big fella, chaplain on the peninsula, introduced me to Don Cutler, who was a sergeant at Burlingame Police Department, and that got me started with the chaplaincy. And so that was a wonderful time through 3 chiefs and lots of exciting times, 9/11 and all sorts of things. So I got some stories to tell about that. Well, I can tell you one story.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll give you a choice. Do you want to hear about protecting the President of the United States, or do you want to hear about me being arrested by the Hillsborough cops?
Both.
Okay, real quick. I was the bad guy during war games at Fort Ord with the SWAT team practice.
What year?
I don't know. Sometime. And so
Is this the president's story, though?
No.
Okay.
This is the being arrested.
All right.
So I was holding a bank hostage. I was the bad guy, and there was negotiations, and the sniper team was on me, and I even saw the red dot go across my eyeglasses. Anyway, so I knew they had me in their sights. So then I make a break for it, right? And I'm running through the buildings of this pretend town at Fort Ord, and the Hillsborough cops get me, right? So they have me down in the dust, and they hook me up with handcuffs. Well, this was maybe like a Wednesday or Thursday, right? And so the war game's called off, and we all drive home, and I see the same cops at Starbucks like later on in the week or weekend or something like that, and I have my clerics on, so I'm dressed as you would think a priest dress.
Right.
You know? Lutherans have the same dress. So I have my clerics on, black and with the collar and everything. And I walk up to him and I roll up my sleeves and I go, you know, when you guys hooked me up, you bruised my wrist, you know. And they cannot place me. They're going, oh, what? When did we arrest you, Father? You know, and I go, no, I was the bad guy at Fort Ord. They go, oh, yeah. So anyway.
Yeah.
So, okay, then the president's story real quick. So I always wanted to be with the troops, you know. The powers that be offered me a gold badge, but as command level, but no, you know, I'm going to be with the guys with a silver badge. I want a silver badge. So they gave me a silver badge with some engraving, which is a sergeant designation. So
Which you have donated to the Burlingame
Yes.
Historical Museum.
Very nice.
Yep,
Yes, thank you. And so I always wanted to be with the troops, and I didn't want to be in an office or anything like that. So I was always on ride-alongs, all this. So anyway, I see the guys lining up one day, and I'm thinking, wow, they're lining up. I want to line up. So I line up, and I'm issued by another department. I'm issued, because they don't know who I am, they issue me riot gear. I go, oh, this is great. So I got the face mask on, and I got,
This is the real deal.
oh, yeah, I got that. This is great. So what are we doing? They go, oh, the president's in town. He's going to go to the Marriott. I go, awesome, So we're marching along, and, people are throwing rocks and stuff like that. And so I'm outside the Marriott, and we're facing out towards the crowd. And I go, this is a great place for a chaplain to be. This is a great place for a pastor to be. Because I know the people that are going in for the $2,000 a head luncheon. I know people that are on the other side of the chicken wire fence screaming at me.
Right, you know both sides.
Yeah, and I'm here with the troops that
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be with. I go, I'm in the perfect spot
Yeah.
to like Pope Francis says, to smell like the sheep.
That's great.
If you're going to be a shepherd, smell like the sheep.
Yeah.
I am smelling like the sheep.
Yeah.
And then everything all worked out okay. But I'll tell you one thing, you think, the pressure that these cops go through, how do they maintain, and, what's it like to be there, and you're just trying to take care of people and protect them, and how are you maintaining your cool? And so I'll give you a secret about this one cop. He's rocking back and forth on his heels, just gently swaying. And he's singing to himself, I'm getting paid and you're not. I'm getting paid and
To
you're
you, he's
not.
singing this to you.
No, he's singing it to the crowds that are
he's singing
yelling
to
at him. Yeah, he's singing to the crowds that are yelling at him.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to tell us what president that was?
Bush the Younger.
Oh, really? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Can we move to current events for a moment?
Sure.
Before we wrap this up?
Sure.
All right. Pope Francis, Pope Leo, right? You made mention of the Pope earlier when you were talking about, being a Lutheran pastor. Did you guys really care about the Pope being from another religion? I mean, what did you really think?
I thought St. John Paul the Great was great. And Joanne and I went to his Mass at Candlestick in 87.
Really?
Yeah. And what a wonderful man, And then St. Benedict, so bright. Gee whiz, what a great theologian. And I admired him so much. And so I would talk about the Pope and make it a matter of conversation where people didn't think, oh, Lutherans don't talk about the Pope. Well, why? Pretty great guys. Why not?
Yeah. So it was something that you would have followed. Like you followed Pope Francis then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Any thoughts on Pope Francis, and why was he considered to be progressive?
I think he was made to be progressive by the media. If you watch his interviews closely, for instance, there's an interview, I think on ABC News, where the woman says, what would you say to a young Catholic girl who hopes to be a priest someday? And Francis, Pope Francis, leans forward and goes, no.
Yes.
So that takes care of that. And then the blessing, he would speak pastorally because he has a pastor's heart. And what you speak pastorally isn't necessarily what you would speak in what you might call a leadership position. And so when people say, well, he blesses same-sex unions, no, he doesn't. He's very clear about that. He will bless, let's say, like Timothy and Frank as individuals, because of course they want to be blessed. Of course he'll bless them, but he won't bless the union. He won't bless the union. So he's very clear about that, but the news made that kind of
interesting, yeah, right.
hazy there, and he was misquoted on that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I could see where he would be seen as a progressive, but not as progressive as the media might
As the
make
media
him.
plays it up. It's a little early for Pope Leo, I get that, but any thoughts? Do you think he's going to go progressive, or is he going to be kind of a conservative Pope?
Well, I really like his motto, which is in illo uno unum.
Here you go with the Latin again.
There, I had to earn my
I
tuition.
wanted to ask you something. Is that something you learned at Lutheran Seminary, or is that something you picked up while you're being a Catholic, the whole Latin thing?
Well, I speak Spanish and I speak French, and I can kind of discern Italian and Portuguese. Latin, I'm just parroting. I can kind of read it, but I'm basically just have memorized it because it's important to me.
Right.
And so I'm just parroting. I'd use French quite a bit because you can get mad at the kids in French and it sounds so beautiful. In Sunday school. Asseyez-vous, mes enfants. Sit down. Right, sit down.
Okay.
Asseyez-vous, mes enfants.
You're right. Does sound good.
Doesn't it sound good?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Okay, Leo.
Okay, so anyway, because he says, we are one in the one. So that's a quote from, because he's Augustinian, from St. Augustine, Psalm 128, 127 in the Vulgate, where St. Augustine will say, though we are many Christians, we are one in Christ. So Pope Leo XIV's motto hearkens or echoes that Augustinian writing and meditation on Psalm 128. And I think that's really good because he's holding that one Catholic and Apostolic Church as being very important. And so that makes me feel happy.
Okay.
And that has to do with the Eucharist as well, because we become one body through one bread. Yeah. So the real presence of Christ is not only in the bread and the wine consecrated, but also in the recipient's body, as he or she is the body of Christ out in the world. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Were you surprised that he was picked, selected?
Boy, not now that I've listened to him. Like on Mother's Day, he sings the Regina Caeli. He sings the Queen of Heaven on Mother's Day. So he's singing to Mary, the Mother of God, on Mother's Day. Right. He comes out on the loggia, the balcony, and sings, chants. What a wonderful sense of propriety and celebration, and also Catholicism. I just thought, wow, that's wonderful. Yeah.
All right. He's 69 years old. He'll be around for a while, huh? So we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's time for a wrap up. But before we go, how about a couple of shout outs to your family and friends?
Well, hi to my son, John, who can now lift me up and carry me around, and to beautiful Haley.
She's your youngest, that's the youngest grandchild?
No, Haley is John's wife.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And she's 98 pounds and just had a 9-pound baby.
Wow. Congratulations.
And little Shepard is blonde hair, just absolutely blonde, white hair. And he really likes dinosaurs, so hi to Shepard. And then Selah was just born. She must be 2 months old. And she's doing a fine job being a baby.
Yeah, that's great. And they live down in Santa Barbara area?
In Montecito.
Montecito. Not a bad neighborhood.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, great. Pete Garrison, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
You bet.
God bless Mark.
He needs all the blessing he can get, buddy. I'd like to thank Peter Garrison for being my guest on a Burlingame It's a Small Town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. Before I close this episode, my feeling is that if you looked up the definition of a nice guy in the dictionary, Pete Garrison's face would be the definition. He is what you would want your pastor to be like. I appreciated Pete's candor about leaving the Lutheran Church and his conversion to Catholicism. This was a personal and sensitive decision that he shared with us, and at no time did he want it to sound like a criticism of the Lutheran Church. I believe we accomplished that. Thanks to my Minister of Podcasts, Mike Nagler, Executive Producer, Shelby Lucchese, Director of Marketing, Adrian Kwok Lucchese, video by the great Ray Tyler, and original music by Bray. You can hear more of Bray at bray.com. This podcast was written and directed by Mark at the Mic and recorded on Wednesday, May 14th, 2025 at the Burlingame Public Library. The Burlingame Historical Society copyrights this program, and no part can be copied and replayed without the written consent of the Burlingame Historical Society. Be sure to look for my next episode of a Burlingame It's a Small Town podcast, as my guest will be Rick Kasuga from the Burlingame Neighborhood Network. So until next time, everyone, see you around Burlingame. It's a small town.